Mark Rogers TV, always talking college football. We've got Steve Deace on the line from Michigan Podcast. You got to join him right there on all the major audio platforms as well as on his YouTube channel. That's where I found him. And once I got a hold of him, I go back to him time and time again for his take, not only on the Wolverines, but all of college football. Steve, how you doing tonight?
Doing well, brother. We got a team on the way to the Final Four for the second time in 5 years. We're talking college football in the middle of March, and it's definitely more fall weather than spring weather right now. So, you know, as Dave Ramsey likes to say, I'm better than I deserve. How about you?
I'm doing just about the same. You know, I like to complain from time to time, but when I put it all in perspective, I've got absolutely nothing to complain about.
Oh, I like to complain a lot. Even though I still know I have nothing to complain about. So there you go.
I got to tell you before we move on to football that your Twitter feed tricked me. So I must have been out and about doing whatever last weekend before that Michigan miraculous shot. You posted something that reflected a loss for the Maize and Blue. So I thought Michigan lost the game.
So did John Beeline. He said after the game he was over there thinking to himself as the team was lining up for the final play what he was going to say to Muhammad Ali, Abdul-Rahman, and Duncan Robinson, the two seniors, and he couldn't believe this was going to be the end. So I wasn't alone. Our head coach, he thought it was over too. So there you go. That's why they call it a miracle shot.
John Beeline certainly has established a brand in college basketball that we get consistently from day to day, season to season. Well, Jim Harbaugh has done the same, but at the same time, maybe a much different demeanor than what we saw when he took hold there his first season and off season in Ann Arbor. So we're not seeing the craziness, the zaniness, the wackiness out of Jim Harbaugh. What do you attribute that to? And what's your take on that?
A lot of us made mention, and it's one of those things too, let's face it, when you're not playing well, things that you would not notice, you suddenly do. Things that wouldn't annoy you now do, right? Because it's always about W and L's, right? But, you know, late last season, people really began to talk about where's our fiery head coach? I mean, he just stands over there like he's on Quaaludes, probably dating myself. He stands over there like he's on tranquilizer darts, deer in the headlights. It looks like the old Keith Olbermann shtick on SportsCenter about Rich Kotite when he coached the Jets. After every fumble, Keith Olbermann would pan to a shot of Rich Kotite and say, stoic. That's kind of what it looked like, you know? We're not, you know, Rashawn Gary's getting tackled for the 9th time by the other team's left tackle, and we're not getting any holding calls. And, you know, John O'Corn, look, he just threw another pick in the rain. Nothing. No reaction. It was beyond bizarre to watch this. And then you go to the press conferences. And it just seemed like once Jim got back from France, actually France is where they're going this year. Once they got back from Rome and meeting the Pope, I don't know if he was just so stunned and enamored with meeting the Pope, but, you know, pretty much every Jim Harbaugh press avail for the rest of the year, usually, you know, the over-under was 4 blank stares, 5 mutters, and 6 single-word answers, okay? So it was really weird, Mark. And it was one of those things, too, and, you know this as a fan, and as a fan who understands, you know, today's modern media, there's certain legends that get started on team message boards that, you know, just become unique to the team message board culture and become like sort of accepted urban legends. And so Jim's persona became one of those things. And about a week ago, Jim gave an interview to kick off spring practice with Sam Webb, who's a very popular talk show host in Ann Arbor and runs the Michigan site for the 24/7 network. And it was like a totally different human being. It was the old Jim again. He was enigmatic. He was charismatic. He was likable. Yeah, zany, quirky, breathtakingly honest, transparent. He offered up several specific issues that they did wrong as coaches, that he did wrong. I mean, he even went back to the first quarter against Florida when Wilton Speight threw those 2 pick sixes. And he said to Sam in this interview, he said, you know, I knew right then and there I kind of had failed our quarterbacks because all off season and all spring and all two-a-days, we had gone up against Don Brown's defense, which is cover 1 or cover 0. And you know, these are some of the best defensive coverages in the country. So I figured our quarterbacks were ready to go, but most teams don't play that kind of coverage exclusively. And so our kids hadn't seen cover 2, cover 3 all camp long, and just the timing wasn't there, the spacing wasn't there, the route precision wasn't there, and that was my fault. It was just like a totally different person. And you can't always make too much of stuff like that one way or the other. And in the end, the wins and losses this fall will tell the tale. But, like I said to you the last time we talked about the coaching staff changes, and it'll remain to be seen whether those were upgrades or not. And just I told you at that time that at the very least they signified that Jimmy was not resting on his laurels, was not content with what happened last year, and was willing to make moves, even if it entailed, really people that were personally close to him, like Kevin Tolbert and Tim Drevno, who had been with him for years, and he cut him loose. I think the fact that he has been so open, and he followed us up in his wide press avail earlier this week, and Devin Bush, there's an interview with him in the Detroit News today saying, "Coach, this is a different Coach Harbaugh than the one we had before. This is last year. This is more like the guy that recruited me." So I think those are good signs. Whether they change the record at all, who knows? They may not help what happens this fall, but they certainly won't hurt. And Jim even acknowledged that he went too far in dialing down the sideline demeanor, afraid of drawing penalties, things of that nature. And he had such a young team. He didn't want them to panic and things. And I just think, sometimes, we have to remember something, that there's a sign that Jim posted in his office during the offseason. That's a famous Bo Schembechler quote: "Just coach the team." And I think sometimes when you're a big media star, when you understand social media, when you use it to your advantage, you can also become, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. And I think Jim has realized that, what I do best is coach a football team. And it's time to make that priority 1, 2, 3, and 4.
So, Steve, it seems as though this was calculated in regards to maybe I'm a bit shell-shocked that we haven't turned a corner, and I also know that I am going to get just chastised up and down if I'm the goofy, zany, enigmatic guy, but I'm not delivering, so I might as well play it low-key, and therefore I don't want to gain the ridicule of the masses because we're not winning, and I'm the goofy, zany guy. So you think this was calculated?
Well, I do think it was calculated. I don't know that it was calculated or that I said it was calculated for the motivations you said, though. Okay? I think that, you might be right. I don't know. I mean, this is sort of like that old show, Herman's Head, when we were kids. Okay? So, I suppose we could get inside the head of Jim Harbaugh and then we would know his motivations. But it seemed to me more, from what he had himself said, it was more a response to new rules about coaching demeanor, being very cognizant of having a young team, and trying to keep more of your composure, not overreact to situations, because maybe they tend to overreact at the same time. And I just think that in the end, you get back to what got you there. You get back to what originally built your program and is your brand. And this is more of that kind of behavior. I don't think it's any coincidence that we didn't get any stories of Jim climbing trees, Jim doing sleepovers, and we finished with a recruiting class that went from number 4 to 21. You know what I'm saying? Now, I don't think that fits everybody. Like, I can't see Urban Meyer climbing a tree. Nick Saban is not sleeping at a kid's house, okay? Just not going to happen. I mean, if a kid says, "Will you spend the night at my house?" Nick Saban's going to be, I hit him with a Coke bottle, hang up, and call the next 5-star kid on his list. It's not happening. But you also couldn't see Nick Saban, you wouldn't see Nick Saban act outside of himself. And I think with Jim, those things are Jim. I think what we saw last year is the act. The CEO, coach who sits there stoic and has no emotion. I think that was the act. I think the guy who does go-karts with Aubrey Solomon's little sister, that's actually Jim. And if you followed him going back to when he was a player at Michigan, playing in the NFL, the guy who, you know, went on Saved by the Bell. Okay, that's who Jim is, and I think he got away from that last year. I think a lot of people who don't know Jim believe that the stunts are the shtick. No, what you saw last fall, standing there looking, you know, like Andy Reid but skinny on a sideline, that was the shtick. The crazy stuff is who he really is, and I think number one thing you have to do to be successful in any walk of life is be true to who you really are. Period.
Totally agree with that. But if you are right on all accounts, I also can respect Jim Harbaugh even more for playing a different character, not for his own benefit or to hide from the media or to deflect the criticism, but to do it for the reasons that you said, because it was going to help his football team. It was going to possibly put them in a more comfortable position, more confident position as a young team. It was going to put them in a better place because he wasn't gaining 15-yard penalties left and right. So at least it was done out of the right motives.
You know, it obviously didn't work the way that they had hoped. And I think Jim's personality is just a part. The personality metamorphosis is a part of it. You know, I go back to something Mark D'Antonio said after Michigan State beat us again. And he opened up his press conference, the weekly press conference after the Michigan State game, by pointing out when he was asked to review the Michigan game, I think I might even remember the exact quote. Michigan, we counted. Michigan used 41 different formation combinations of formations to score 3 points against us in the first half. And this was something that, you know, Jim alluded to in his interview with Sam Webb and in his press conference to kick off spring ball as well, that, you know, why are we doing certain things? And, you know, I think sometimes, particularly when you come from the NFL, you can get overly enamored. You know, the NFL and college football are both coaches' leagues. But the NFL is even more a coaching league because there might be one team a year whose overall talent base, maybe, usually it's not even one team a year, but there might be one team a year in the NFL whose overall talent base is just that much better than everybody else's. But for the most part, this is a league that over the last decade and a half has averaged 5 new teams per year in the playoffs. That's how much parity there is. That's how much transition there is year to year in the NFL. And so a huge emphasis is put on coaches finding any advantage. Any advantage. You know, you can watch the New England Patriots. They will reinvent their offense from a 4-3 to a 3-4 every week. They'll reinvent their offense from a run-based attack to 4 wides and Rob Gronkowski every week, because you also don't have limitations on practice time. Coaches can live in the film room. You know, college football is a coach's game too, but these are full-time students on top of players. And so even though most programs even kind of wink at the 20-hour rule, you also can't have them in there for 40 hours or 50 hours either. And so inevitably, the players are going to make plays on game day, no matter what kind of coach you are. And I think, you know, they overcoached this team last year. And I've used this example before with you, Mark. I know everybody's talked about our offensive line issues, and they're well documented. But, you know, if you're a longtime Michigan fan, you remember the last time the offensive line was as bad as it was last year. And that's the last 2 years under Brady Hoke. In those last 2 years under Brady Hoke, Michigan couldn't block Akron. Michigan couldn't block Connecticut. They couldn't block anybody. But what did we see last year? When Michigan played a team that they clearly were physically better than, they mauled those guys. We had, for the first time since 1991, that's a quarter century ago, we had 3 running backs gain over 500 yards in a season. We had one game against Minnesota where we had 2 backs almost get 200 yards. That never happened in Michigan history, not even in Schembechler's heyday. So we were mauling the teams that we were physically better than. So what does that tell you? It's not a physical thing. When we could just line up and physically maul the teams we were better than, and then we couldn't block the teams that were as good as us, that's a coaching thing, Mark. That's not a player thing. That's not a talent thing. And that happens when Jim hires Greg Fry to come here, who's a zone blocking scheme guy, and says, you coach the tackles, and his buddy Tim Grebno, who's a man ball guy, you coach the interior. We got 2 different coaches for the same position group from 2 different styles. You know, I don't make $9 million a year like Jim does, but I could tell you that probably ain't going to work. And it didn't work. You know, and so this year we've got Ed Warner, who did a great job at Ohio State. Minnesota had a really good running game with him last year. most people don't think he's much of an offensive coordinator. He's not going to be. And all he is our lone dedicated offensive line coach. I think you will see an exponential improvement because of that alone. One unifying messenger for a team that has several really highly recruited players sitting in that meeting room on the offensive line.
Well, the difference in NFL coaching and college coaching is, of course, bringing the players on campus. So I would agree with you that the coaching from the sideline is more important in the NFL because of what you allude to. All you have to do is watch the red zone between about 3:15 and 4:15, and you see how close NFL games are.
Yep.
You could put a blanket over the league in terms of the teams between about 5-11 and 11-5, and you could flip-flop them all over the place. There's a couple of elite teams. There's a couple of really lousy teams, Cleveland Browns, and the rest of the league, the 25 other teams, you can throw a blanket over those teams. So the coaching matters in terms of the preparation and then the coaching on game day. Of course, the Nick Sabans and Urban Meyers do most of their coaching in terms of the difference in the game. They did it back in February when they signed that class. Therefore, they walk on the field 15 or 20 points even better than a Michigan State or somebody like that. They're that good.
Exactly right. Yep. You nailed it. Couldn't have said it better myself. You're exactly right.